And you're on, Reg.
Yes, apologies. Members and guests, good afternoon. My name is Reg Smith, and as you probably already know, I'm your Master of Ceremonies for this afternoon's meeting of the Rotary Club of Melbourne. Once again, we're broadcasting from various locations, and if you do have difficulties, just remember that we've got a catch-up service on our website. You can go along and have a look at the video of the meeting, and you can also listen to the meeting on podcast. Please note that everyone will be muted for the duration of the spoken part of the meeting. Questions and comments can be submitted through the chat room, and we'll do our best to include you. Please make sure that right now that your glass or appropriate vessel is charged. Thanks today will be given by Alistair Urquhart, who I'm going to hand to in one moment.
Alistair's still muted.
I'm unmuted now, I hope.
You are, Alistair, and you'll be spotlighted to give us the Thanksgiving. Over to you.
We are all being together, partly brought about by social distancing. We are all saying hello in the street. In a coffee shop, as I left it with social distancing the other day, this baby little girl waved at me and smiled, and I looked up and I said to her grandmother, what is this little lady going to play? What music is she going to play? And the lady said, her mother plays the bagpipes. And I said, gosh. And within 15 seconds, we'd swapped names, and I pulled out my phone and gave it to her, having already been planning to call my younger sister. And this lady and my sister were close friends at school, so they had a chat on the phone, just from having met somebody in the street. Leaving the news agency the next day, another little girl looked at me and waved, and to cut a long story short, her father was with a hornpipe band. It's amazing how you can quickly make a link when you're social distancing. Then over the surfers at Ocean Grove, I'd never seen so many surfboards before. Great waves to attract them. But why so many? Tuesday afternoon. Bernard Salt, the social commentator, I pretended that I was him, and I started testing people to find out why. The first bloke with his surfboard to come out was an accountant. The second was a sharebroker. And I said, from Collins Street, and he said, of course. And we both were called Alistair, and then he looked at me and laughed and said, I fought with your daddy in the war. And then I reflected and thought that this man probably went off to the war then in New Guinea with our member David Freeze. So isn't it amazing how just, even with the social distancing, we can link up with all sorts of people. My best wishes to Robert Webster. Thank you for all you do, sir. And it's all about linking with others, not just in our neighbourhood. It's fun, it's hard work, it's good luck, it's serendipity, and good God, heaven's sakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Reg, and thank you, Alistair, particularly for your reflection and words of encouragement. Yes, we are in a different world at the moment, and it's my great pleasure to propose a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia and Rotary International. Now, welcome to everyone to our 41st meeting of the Rotary year, and in fact our 4,841st meeting of our Rotary Club. This, of course, is our 9th online meeting in our 99-year history. And what a wonderful meeting last week when we merged our weekly luncheon meeting with the evening meeting, and had a terrific attendance of 85 who were privileged to hear two great speakers Well done to Michaela and the evening meeting team. Last week, we also held our inaugural coffee club Chitchat at 10 a.m. last Friday morning. We had 20 participants on the screen, and a great chit-chat ensued. We were able to find out what was happening with those members in their isolation, a great opportunity to freely chat about matters that were relevant. And thank you to Joe Mavris for hosting that event. And we're going to do it again this Friday at 10:30 a.m. Our guest speaker online today is Dr. Robert Webster, OAM, State President of the Return Services League of Australia, Victorian Branch Incorporated. Rob is no stranger to online speaking, as no doubt he has had to resort to this medium more often in recent times. And today his topic is, what is a naive young accountant like me doing in a war zone? Robert will be more formally introduced later in the program by our Chair of the Day, past President Peter Rogers, but would you join me in welcoming Robert and Peter at this stage? Online today for member induction to our club, we have Tim Coleman and his sponsor, Mandy Wendt. And Tim's club mentor will be Chris Stillwell. So welcome to Tim, Mandy and Chris, and to all our members and guests who have joined us for the Zoom meeting today. And now for the induction. Tim Connellan into membership of Rotary Club of Melbourne. I do call upon your sponsor, Tim, Mandy Wendt, to formally introduce you. Mandy.
Thank you very much. President Kevin, it gives me much pleasure to introduce for membership of Rotary Melbourne, Tim Connellan AM, who holds the position and classification of CEO TLC for Kids. He is a former member of the Rotary Club of Flemington and will be a member of Turak One Group. He will be known in the club as Tim. Thanks, President.
Thank you, Mandy. Timothy Connellan, we welcome you as a member of the Rotary Club of Melbourne. You have been chosen because your fellow members believe you to be a leader in your vocation and have the personal and professional qualities that will ensure the principles of Rotary will be safe in your hands. As a former member of the Rotary Club of Flemington, you are already experienced in the application of the object of Rotary. And with the help of your fellow members, you will, I'm sure, quickly feel comfortable in the companionship and service of our organisation. The Rotary badge, which you have received by special delivery yesterday, is, as you well know, your entry to thousands of Rotary clubs throughout the world. Tim, we most heartily welcome you to the continued membership of Rotary. And in doing so, with this expectation, I offer you the right hand of fellowship and ask members to join me in welcoming you to the membership of our club. And now, Tim, I'd be delighted if you would say a few words.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Mandy and Reg, and for the opportunity to be part of Melbourne Rotary. It is a huge honour. I do miss the fellowship that I used to have at Flemington, but that was many years ago, and I've gone on a different journey with my life. It's been busier since then, but now I feel I've got a lot more that I can give back, and I suppose be part of this the fellowship and the organisation that is Rotary of Melbourne, and I'm just absolutely pleased to do it. Brief history of myself: I've been in the non-profit sector for 27 years now. Set up TLC for Kids 21 years ago, and to date we've been able to help 9.5 million kids so far. We've got a lot of exciting projects that we're working on, but there's also a lot that we'd be able to do, especially with Rotary of Melbourne. So I am looking forward to getting to know everybody and all the members individually, and of course provide as much input and service as I can to uphold the values of Melbourne Rotary. So thank you very much, Kevin, Mandy and Reg and everyone for welcoming me into your group, and I certainly won't let you down.
Well, thank you, Tim, and we do look forward to the opportunity when we can welcome you face to face, and that day will come, and we will certainly make sure that happens. And thank you again for your preparedness to become a member of Rotary Melbourne, and we look forward to your contribution. Member news. Today is the 80th birthday of one of our long-standing members, but unfortunately we haven't been able to connect with him today, but we will chase him down, and that is Stuart Stribling. So for those of you who can get on the phone and chase him down and wish him a happy birthday, I'm sure he will greatly appreciate it. And today is also another anniversary, 33 years of membership. Quite a milestone, and that is, of course, our past president and newest honorary member, Mev Connell. So congratulations, Mev, and I know you're online as we speak. I've already talked about the coffee club Chitchat, which is going to be on again this Friday at 10:30. So do join us. Feel comfortable to get your cup of coffee or tea, a couple of bickies, and sit in a comfortable chair and join us for half hour or so. Joe Moveris will be sending out the login Zoom details today, so you can make a note of that and join us 10:30 on Friday. It is now my pleasure to hand this meeting over to today's chairman, past President Peter Rogers, who will introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, President Kevin, and I'm delighted to be at this meeting with all our members and guests. It's my great pleasure this afternoon to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Robert Webster, who's the State President of Rsl in Victoria, and he's held that role since February 2017. There are many links between the RSL and Rotary. For a start, they live opposite us in Collins Street at number 4. We're at number 15. And we share the early leadership of our organisations. And we're about the same age. And Rotary in Australia is coming up to 100 years, and RSL a little more than that. And of course, Sir John Monash was a leader in the establishment of both Rotary and the RSL. And he was our second president, of course. There are other common initiatives between the RSL and Rotary, and many of them are in health. And Robert has devoted a lot of his life, after starting as an accountant. He's become interested in health and been a board member of Austin Health, and currently a board member of the Royal Humane Society. And we have some partnerships with RSL and Rotary in health, in the treatment of trauma. And a lot of this has happened since Robert Webster became state president. We have a common program to fight PTSD, and Australian Rotary Health now has 4 joint PhD programs with the RSL looking at PTSD. Nationally, there are 4, and one of those is in Victoria. So we're delighted, Robert, to have this partnership with the RSL, and I'd ask my fellow members and guests to give you a hearty welcome to speak to our club. Robert.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to President Kevin for asking me to be here today. He asked what topic I'd talk about, and I thought I'd go right back to where it started, which is in February 1968, when I was required to register for national service. I was deferred until April 1969 to finish some exams and bits and pieces. And I went into the Army on the 24th of April 1969. A Nasho, as one of the wags in our unit called it, one of Bob Menzies' chosen few. A little bit more about me. I inadvertently come from a reasonably long line of military people. My mother and father both served in World War II. My maternal grandfather served for 10 years, from 1937 through to 1947. His brother, unfortunately, had been killed on the Somme in the First World War. So, you know, there's a lot of links, and being also the family genealogist, it's interesting to trace the 30 odd that went to World War I, about 40 that went to World War II, and a number that went to Vietnam and Korea and other places. My brother is a Vietnam veteran as well. He's a regular soldier, or was a regular soldier for 23 years. And he and I spent an overlapping 12 months. I was in Vietnam from February to February. Ian was in Vietnam from September to September. So we had about 5 months in common in country. During recruit training, actually, I was conferred with my Diploma of Commerce from Swinburne in absentia. They wouldn't let me out for the day. I don't know why. They might have thought I wouldn't come back. But after finishing recruit training, the military chose, he's a newly qualified accountant with a couple of years work experience. Let's make him a stores clerk. So they taught me all about accounting for oil and petrol and ammunition and stores and all those sorts of things. So after I did that, I went up to Townsville for about 5 months. Got in the practice of how you did it in the field for a military unit. And then in February 1970, I went to Vietnam. That seemed to stop most of the accounting. The unit that I was appointed to, the 26 Transport Company, actually controlled, was essentially the town council for Nui Dat. And we had the garbage truck, the water truck, the fuel point, you name it, the post office, the canteens unit, and all these sorts of places. So it was just the town council. But our biggest role was not only looking after the internals of the base, but we also controlled the heavy lift helicopters that were taking material out into the field. And so to a certain extent, I became an air traffic controller. Interestingly enough, all our call signs were chairman, because essentially an air traffic controller for heavy lift helicopters sits in a deck chair and pops a coloured smoke grenade as to where you want the pilot to put the stuff down. If I can just explain that. Nui Dat was a fully enclosed defensive perimeter. We had virtually no Vietnamese nationals working inside the base. And so with the 3 battalions of infantry that were there, they worked outside the base, sometimes for months at a time. And what they did is they developed what we called fire support bases. And of course, this week is the anniversary of the battles of Fire Support Base Coral and Balmoral. And so one of my tasks was to organise fuel, ammunition, water to be heavy lifted in 500-gallon bladders out into the field. Now, I don't want to get too technical on this, but essentially a fire support base was about 8,000 metres out. And the reason it was 8,000 metres out is that the main guns that we had at Nui Dat were able to fire 11,500 metres. So the fire support base remained underneath the cover of the guns from Nui Dat. I had a terrific year. Learned a heap of stuff about myself. Learned a heap of stuff about living with, 40, 50 other blokes too. And so, in that respect, I had a reasonably good war, if you can call war good. Changed a bit on Christmas Day, 1970. We had in our unit, unfortunately, a shooting where two of our sergeants, one of the guys that I worked with, were killed. And, that sort of changed the whole world, because about 15 years later, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And partly the PTSD was diagnosed because of my guilt, that I couldn't do anything to have stopped it. And how come they got killed and I didn't? And those sort of feelings stay with you forever. And so, coming back from Vietnam, I had some leave, did all the normal boring things like go down the beach, have a surf, visit the girlfriend that I'd had before I went away, etc., etc., etc. And life was good. I should point out at this stage I was living in South Australia, and so from anything that's come from since, I'm a South Australian, because my army number starts with a number 4, whereas if you're from Victoria, it starts with a 3, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not going to bore you with the details, other than to say that we ran probably 150 to 180 flights a month. We handled between 45 and 55,000 pounds of rations. You've got to remember, we're in pounds at this stage because we were on the tail end of the American logistics system. It was easier to add 8,000 on the end of 500,000 than was to run our own logistics system. Lots of water. Our transport units, one of them was a tipper unit, and it built roads. We worked with some engineers, and we quarried out the side of a couple of hills and used it for road base and all that sort of stuff. So I came home in February 1971. Really eerie. At that stage, we're just over the moratorium marches and those sorts of things. I came home on a 707, Qantas 707, landed in Sydney just after midnight. We were tucked away in motels, Bondi and various places, and the army expected me tomorrow night, in 15 hours or 16 hours after I landed, to hop on a train to go to Melbourne, and then spend a day wandering around Melbourne and hop on a train to go to Adelaide. I've still got the receipt, $38 it cost me to actually buy a plane ticket on top of what they were going to pay as my train ticket. And TAA still lost my luggage. We won't go there. Anyway, so next morning I hot-footed it down to Mascot and hopped on an aeroplane, came to Melbourne, got out of the airport, straight to the TRB, the transport, whatever they were called, VRB, to renew my driver's license, because they wouldn't let my father renew my driver's license because I was overseas. So if I was going to drive, I needed to get my driver's license renewed. And so this lovely young lady kept asking me why I didn't renew my license. And I said, well, I've only arrived back in the country 11 hours ago, and I've been in uniform in the other part of the world. Anyway, eventually got that. Fronted out to see my grandparents who lived in Box Hill, just near the Box Hill footy ground. And as I walked in, my grandfather said, I know where you've been. My grandfather, who served for 10 years during the Second World War, was a pacifist. His brother had been killed in the First World War, and nothing would stop him being a pacifist. And he said, I know where you've been, even though your mother's been sending me postcards from Townsville, I know where you've been. And Ian's probably there too. And I said, well, now you come to mention it, you're probably right. anyway, it was a really good day, and I then caught a plane about 5 o'clock to go back to Adelaide, and sort of the rest is history. Had 6 weeks worth of leave, went back into the army just before Easter in 1971, and one day they just called us all out, and all the 16th intake national servicemen line up. Now, in the army, you line up according to the highest to the shortest. So here's sort of 40 blokes lined up. Beautiful. And this wizened old major comes out and he says, "You're all lined up in alphabetical order." That took 40 minutes to work the alphabetical order. And literally he walked down from A to Z with a W. I was pretty close to Ziggy, my mate who was on the end. And he handed us a bit of paper. And he said to us, "That's your interim discharge. It's the 11th of April. If you're still on the base in an hour, you'll be classed as a trespasser." Scratched my head, packed my bongos and left. Went home, told my dad. And my dad said, "The bastards haven't changed at all." They did that to us as well. So the parting words as we bolted for the gate was, if you're not back at work on the 7th of May, you lose any rights you have under the National Service Act. You had to go back to work within 14 days of being discharged in order to keep your job and all those sorts of things. So that's it. So I came back, settled down, became an accountant. One of the nice things from my professional body, the CPA Australia, is that in the end they accepted 12 months of my 2-year military service as professional experience for professional purposes. A couple of years later, came back to Melbourne. I've just seen a question come up, and I'll just answer that one quickly. Later in 1971, when my brother came home from Vietnam, he and I went for a swim down the beach. We lived about 400 metres from the beach. And it was a bitterly cold afternoon with a southwesterly blowing, and the waves were fabulous. And so Ian and I have sort of wandered up after we'd had a swim, and this bloke's walked out the pub and he's gone, "Jesus, you guys reckon it's cold? Come and see these two silly buggers." Anyway, the long and short of it was, the local RSL, I walked in, became a member, and it was like, good on you, buddy. Anyway, we came back to Melbourne. Married, walked into the QRSL. The president looked at me and said, "I know you." And I said, "Yeah, Harry, I used to go to school with Tony and Andrew." And he said, "You wait till I tell them that I've just seen you." And so I had a very good welcome home. People wanted to talk to me, ask me what I'd done, and those sorts of things. So it's a bit different, and I know it's different in different states that some Vietnam veterans didn't have a good welcome home. I accept that. Unfortunately, that's not my experience. So, settle down, couple of kids, get involved in the RSL. All of a sudden, kids start wanting to play school sport and all that sort of stuff. So I got out of the RSL for about 10 years. I stayed a member, but got out of any administrative roles. And then the local senior sergeant of police, who was the secretary of the sub-branch, knocked on the door one day and said, "Jack Ryan, who's the local plumber, he's going to retire next year as the president. So we want you back on the committee." And from 1988, I'm still here. So PTSD hit me in the probably mid-90s, 20 years after it happened. And my wife said to me one day, she said, "Geez, you don't like Christmas, do you?" And I just said, "Well, Wally and Alan got killed on Christmas Day, 1970, and it's not a real good day to remember." And she said, "Yeah, well, how come we got 2 kids born in December?" Yeah, righto, let's not go there. Anyway, after a while, she pushed me off to see some counsellors and all sorts of things. And it's all that stuff that you hear about. People dream and those sorts of things. And so I did a bit of work in it. I refused to accept that I had PTSD for a while. It took a while, probably through to the mid-2000s, when I really got some serious treatment. And I must admit, it was absolutely life-changing when I did it. And I reckon I've been a better dad, a better husband, and all sorts of things since I had that treatment. I did a program at the Heidelberg Hospital, 10 weeks, 3 days a week, and it just put everything back into perspective. See, the thing is, when you go in the army, the first 3 months, they break you and then remake you in their mould. And you virtually never get a debrief. I came home by plane, got told to clear off, go back to work. Bit different, I think, from the guy, and there's a whole range of studies being done. A bit different from the guys in the battalions, where the majority of the battalion came home by ship. Had a 14 to 16 day sea voyage to come home, to calm down, debrief, whatever. I fired my rifle at 11 o'clock on the morning of the day that I came home. Whereas these guys had 2 weeks to chill out on the way home. So there's this study being done about coming home by plane, coming home by train. The other study is the one being done between a regular soldier, like my brother, and a national serviceman. The national serviceman, in many cases, just got told, your 2 years is up, out. Whereas the regular soldier had his 4 or 6 weeks leave and went back into a unit where there were people who had probably already served overseas and those sorts of things. So that's the whole range of different variables that you can see there might impact. And if you can sit around at the end of the day with the guys in the unit that you're with, maybe a cup of tea or a beer, you can talk about those sorts of things. But you can't if you don't have anybody to talk about. So PTSD is a learning curve, a massive learning curve. And I went back and, at the encouragement of Terry Grant, Peter, and did a bit of back work in, where's PTSD come from? Well, PTSD appears in a number of the Shakespeare plays, where one of the wives at one stage complains, no doubt to the audience, that her husband has lost interest in her, he's not sleeping well, and all this sort of stuff. The classical PTSD symptoms. Next, documented in the American Civil War, and was called Soldier's Heart. World War I had a number of names: shell shock, lack of moral fibre, and probably the worst one, just plain cowardice. And then, so World War II, war neurosis, combat fatigue, and then early out of Vietnam was called combat stress disorder. And now we know it in the psychological mental illness ranks as post-traumatic stress. Now, clearly it's been identified in the military for a long time, but of course it's only now being widely recognised as existing across the whole community. And it exists across the whole community, and probably people who see more of it than the soldiers do are the ambos, the fireys, and the coppers. And so there's a lot of work being done with not only the military, but across the emergency services cohorts, particularly with PTSD. The symptoms are classified in sort of 3 interesting ways: intrusive symptoms, the symptoms that impinge on you, the nightmares, the bad dreams, the night sweats, the just not feeling right. Avoidance, and avoidance sort of comes from all sorts of things. I just don't believe Christmas happens. It's the way I've dealt with it for a long time. I used to deal with it that way for a long time, which wasn't real flash for the kids, because with 2 of them with their birthdays in December, yeah. You just try to forget stuff, gaps in your memory, or you drown it with drugs or alcohol. And so there's all sorts of things. Sleep disturbance, anger, irritability, concentration problems, constantly on the lookout for signs of danger. One of the cartoons that goes around and around and around the Vietnam Veteran Network is the wife sitting opposite the husband in the restaurant, and the husband sitting there hunched down with a cap pulled down. And she said, "All right, I'll swap seats with you so that you can watch the door." Very common, very common. You need to have something secure behind your back so that you can watch what's coming at you. Terrible arousal symptoms. Car backfires still get me occasionally. I hit the deck in Collins Street one day with a car backfire. That startle reflex. And so it's through the Rotary mental health work that has been done, that a couple of our sub-branches in the northern part of the state, Shepparton predominantly, but a number up in that region, have got together with Rotary, and we've extended that a bit. Our view at the moment is that we will support Rotary any fundraising to support mental health and PTSD. Now, I've got to make a very tight difference here. If I say I'm raising money for veterans, I cannot spend that money outside Victoria. Victorian Act of Parliament goes into what's called a Patriotic Fund, can only be spent on veterans in Victoria. So we stand next to Rotary and assist Rotary. We provide some accommodation, or we'll provide the advertising, but Rotary's doing the fundraising. Why? Because Rotary Health's headquarters is in Sydney. And that's where the money goes to first. And if it comes through our books, we can't do it. And so it's one of those archaic pieces of legislation. Victoria is now the only state that has it. Sometimes it's frustrating, but it gives us a very good control mechanism and gives the state and the community a fairly good handle on, we raise money from the public, we're spending it in Victoria, we're reporting to Consumer Affairs in Victoria on how we've raised it and how we've spent it. So that's PTSD. I'm pleased to, I've met Katrina Streathfield a couple of times. It's the lass who lives at Romsey Lancefield somewhere, but she's actually enrolled as a student in the University of Newcastle, and we're helping her. Her project's dealing with transmitted PTSD to kids, and there's an enormous amount of evidence on it's inherited through the families, and so she's doing some really particular work on the kids of veterans, not, well, a bit past Vietnam veterans, but more recent veterans in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Timor, and other peacemaking operations around the world. She's putting together what she hopes to be a toolbox that can be used by families to help the kids, and I think we're doing as much as we can to support her, and that I think it's the next Rotary district to the west of you guys, been very strong supporters. I spoke at their conference in Yarrawonga a couple of years ago on PTSD and those sorts of things, and I can only congratulate Rotary for the work that they're doing in that space, and not only in the mental health, but all sorts of other places. Katrina's been sponsored by Darebin RSL and I think the Rotary Club of Darebin, and others are pitching in there as well, but they're providing each $10,000 a year towards her scholarship. And so that's how we're working with you people. I was first introduced to Terry Grant not long after I became state president, and it turns out that we've got a couple of mates in common, and it's a bit impossible. I met Terry one day, and about 3 weeks later I'm sitting in a church at a funeral, and he comes and sits next to me for a mate of ours' mother. and it's it's that small world business that that gets on. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions. I hope you've learned a bit from what I've talked about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's Reg Smith speaking. For some reason, I can't spotlight myself.
Got him.
There you go. That's what control means. Okay, we've got 3 questions, but a couple of comments. I just wanted to say you've really resonated with several people in the room who are working very hard right now on building expanded trauma response. I can almost guarantee you'll have some contacts from them to see where we might collaborate. The first question comes from someone you might know quite well, Bev Brock.
Yes.
And she's asked if you could expand on some of the biggest lessons you learned from the whole conscription experience.
Look, I went in with Dad's advice ringing in my ears. My dad's advice was, get on with it. Don't fight the system, because if you do that, it'll get you first. Don't fight the system, but if anything ever happens, make sure it gets written down. Because many of the World War II guys came back and they had this extraordinarily swift medical. Anything wrong with you? No. And that came back to haunt them 15 and 20 years later, when they developed not only physical injuries, but mental injuries. But what I learnt from National Service, I went in, I thought, fairly gregarious sort of character, is that you've got to learn to get on with everyone, whether you like it or not. You've got to. If somebody crosses you, well, you've just got to move on. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes that might have been the major, so you're stuck with him. But hey, yeah, that's one of those things. Look for the good in everybody. I think that's an important message that the whole community could embrace. The teamwork, the loyalty, the friendship, persistence, perseverance. It took me 10 years to do a doctorate part-time. It was a long time coming, but it was fun. And I did the doctorate because it was interesting and it was a topic that I wanted to do. But we had Little E and a few other bits and pieces. It took a while. But that's perseverance, persistence, call it what you want. Service. And that's what comes out of it. I won't say I often think about, but I wonder about how my life might have been if I had never been in the military. One of the good things that I've had is that I've been able to keep up with a group of guys that I went through Swinburne with doing commerce, to the extent that we had a cocktail party last Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and everybody had to post a glass, a toast and a glass to the good old days at Swinning. And so you get a different perception of the selfish me and become very much an outreaching, what can I do to help? And I'm telling a bit of a story here, but my dad got an OAM for services to Scouts. My stepmother got an OAM for services to choirs, and I got one for service to the community of Victoria, not only for veterans, but for participation in junior sport, participation in my professional body, as Kevin well knows, the Australian Property Institute. And so I think it's really lovely recognition, but you realise that you can give back, and it doesn't hurt most of the time.
Can I ask, is it something that you would recommend to young men and women of today as something worthwhile in their development?
Look, I have a view, Bev, that we all should do some service to our country at some stage, whether it's in the military or whether in a civilian service. I don't have that much of a difference, but I'd be a bit less inclined to say to military for overseas service, military for local service, but you probably do it via the SES or the CFA or some of those other broad-based community organisations that give back to our community.
Thanks, Robert. The next question, actually, I will confess, is a little close to home. And my wife and I have had elders in aged care recently, and it relates to the RSL's aged care facilities, which I'm sure you would know has been in the news of late. We're just wondering what protections are you planning to put in place for the veterans and tenants that are in those centres if the facilities are indeed sold? And can I just add to that question just how impressive, particularly Vasey Healthcare, that Vasey Aged Care at Brighton is? It's probably at the top of the list in terms of quality performance in Australia. So we'd be just interested in some background if you can provide it.
Well, the issue is that back in 2007, 3 years after the company had been formed, it became quite obvious that we were servicing other than veterans. And that's this bit of legislation I was talking about a bit earlier, Patriotic Funds, the Veterans Act, to the extent that there is now close to or slightly more than 30% of the client and resident mix at Vasey is not veterans, not out of the veteran community. And the company members will make the decision in due course. It's just that I happen to be the conduit who wrote the letter. But very conscious of the need to protect veterans. Very conscious. The Aged Care Act protects their work in aged care. Little less certain in the individual independent living units, but one of the things that if this sale does come about, you can be assured of that the RSL's core business is welfare, and we'll be looking out for them all the way.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is from Robert Fisher, past president of the club. Robert asks, are the services better now at releasing people gently and with the support at the end of their time in service?
I'd have to say it's the curate's egg. There's some services are very good. Some unit commanders are very good. Some aren't. Because if you're hanging on to somebody who's going out because of ill health or whatever, in many cases, like any boss, you're trying to fill your establishment with people who can work for you. And if you've got someone who's ill or crook, you want them out the door as soon as possible. And that, unfortunately, is still a mentality that exists. Clearly, DVA and the Department of Defence have been working on this transition issue. Minister Tehan, in his last year as the Minister for Veterans Affairs, made a really interesting ministerial statement. And the numbers are going to be, because they're coming off the top of the head, about 5,500 people transition out of the Defence Force every year. For 5,000 of them, we never hear again. They make a good transition, they move on, go out to a job, etc., etc. But it's people who often transition with medical issues, some of which at that stage are non-diagnosed, really have difficulty adapting to life, and it's that process, that transition process, that everybody is beating Defence and DVA around the head. One of the nice things now, however, is that DVA will now, anybody who walks out the door will get coverage for mental health treatment, which is a really, really, really terrific announcement. And that happened about 18 months ago. And in fact, Defence, when the first day that you go into Defence now, you also get a DVA file number. So DVA knows about you from the minute you join the military. Whereas in my case, DVA didn't find out about me for 10 years after I got out. And I have to go and find them and chase them and grab them medical documents and, you know, make appointments to see doctors and all that sort of stuff. So they're working on a better transition. It sometimes, unfortunately, doesn't happen that way. But the other issue that came out very much in Minister Tian's statement is that the military is very much married to itself, in that both partners serve in the military. And what the military is finding is that if they've got kids, the minute the kids get into senior primary or starting secondary, one of the two partners wants out of the military in order to give the kids some stability in their school life. And so there's some real issues there that we're coming to grips with. And DVA and the ex-service community Australia-wide are coming to grips with.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. I'm going to call on Peter Rogers now to say a few words on all of our behalf. Peter.
Well, look, thank you, Reg. In fact, what I'm going to do is just say, Robert, thank you for your personal story about PTSD and for the support that you're giving to Rotary in our combined program. And what I'd like to do is pass it perhaps back to you, Kevin, and you might want to add some additional comments of thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter, and certainly thank you, Rob. You've been a pal of mine for a long time, and I've even learnt more about you today. But your preparedness to enunciate with great understanding and feeling some salient issues, sharing them with us today has been greatly appreciated. You talked about the involvement of Katrina, so I won't go over that, but that is a classic example of how we can work forward in an area of PSD to make a meaningful contribution. I've just got one quick question, and I'm sure I've got the privilege of running over time a little bit. What did it feel like standing in the middle of the MCG on Anzac Day alone?
Well, I didn't do it on Anzac Day for starters. We did it on the Wednesday beforehand. But two things. I didn't have the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Yeah. I also missed the camaraderie. And I say, I've known Doc Reed from Essendon for years and years and years and years. I would always say good day to Doc as I came out. And, you know, there's just that sort of thing. You get into the middle of the MCG to recite the ode. You recite the ode, and the MCG sound systems give you a different return from the Richmond end to the Melbourne end. So I didn't miss that this year. But the other thing that really surprised me is, and you know, I knew it in my head, but you've got to experience it, is that 90,000 bodies absorb sound. Because when John played the last post on the bugle, with 5 of us in the ground, cameraman, a couple of reporters, John and myself, the last post went around and around and around the concrete, probably for, you know, I'm exaggerating, but it kept going, if you know what I mean, even though John had finished playing. And that was probably the eeriest part of the day.
Well, Robert, we've seen you both on the ground with 5 people. We've seen you on the ground with 90,000 people. And for those of us who are Collingwood supporters, we look forward to seeing you again there next year when we can be at the ground. But congratulations on your leadership of the RSL Victorian Division. We really commend you for how you adopted the restrictions this year and made, I think, a far more involved community response to Anzac Day. A bit like, I guess, what we're doing on Zoom reach out today. So thank you and congratulations, and we look forward to your involvement in the future. So I do want to just cover two matters very briefly. Firstly, for those of you who have enjoyed today's meeting, don't forget that we can go onto our Fighting Fund appeal and book a menu and be part of the virtual lunch. And Joe was going to be able to screenshot the invitation for us, and I think that's coming now. There we are. Now I do note that Joe has changed the wording from the $15 Collingwood class to be $15 Richmond class, but we'd much prefer everyone to be up in the Melbourne class in Chairman's Lounge. So do contribute to our Fighting Fund, and we have some very worthy causes to work with, I'm sure. Could I ask Robert Fisher, our past president, to just tell us about one very worthy cause that's been that's emerged due to the COVID-19 situation? Robert, please.
Well, thank you, Kevin. In the interest of time, I'll cut short what I might have said otherwise. But as some of our members may know, AFRI AusCare provides support services to migrant youth from African backgrounds and their families who are often at risk or experiencing mental health issues, family and intergenerational conflict, or who are in the court system due to offences arising from these circumstances. Now, as you can imagine, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it fresh challenges for this community, some of whom are unable to access the various measures that have been offered by government agencies. So as a result, unemployment, crime and family violence are escalating. The CEO of AFRI AusCare, Selba Gondoza Luke, has approached District Governor nominee Del Hoy for Rotary's help in restocking the community pantry with essential goods, including food, personal items, and cleaning products. And Rotary Glen Ira is able to purchase food items at wholesale, and some of it gathered will be used in preparing special meals for the African community. Dale Hoy, past President Quinn Scalzo, and President Kevin have been instrumental in encouraging this initiative, and DIK through Bob Glindeman are supplying some goods. But here's an opportunity for all of us to check our own pantries and cupboards for some of the items that are requested, or indeed buy them from a supermarket, and I'd be more than happy to pass them on. So please look out for the email that Joe will be circulating later today or tomorrow that has all the details you need. Any assistance you can give will be greatly appreciated by this disadvantaged community. So thank you, Kevin.
Pleasure, Robert, and thank you for your involvement in this project, and to Quinn and to Bob. We look forward to hearing further as time goes on as to the fundraising effort which is being put together by our cluster of clubs in conjunction with the Bayside cluster. Well, that wraps up a wonderful meeting today. Thanks to all the participants and certainly our guest speaker, Dr. Rob Webster. We greatly appreciate everyone connecting online, and hope to see you next week when our speaker at again a lunchtime meeting will be our former member, Nev Power. And for those of you who would know Nev, you would also know he was tapped on the shoulder recently by the Prime Minister, and Nev is now the chair of the National COVID-19 Coordination Commission. And in picking up the phone and giving him a call some weeks ago and congratulating him on this appointment, I said, would you have some time to come online? And he's going to be joining us next week. So that's a meeting not to miss. In the meantime, stay safe, spread kindness, and I'll now close the meeting. And if Maestro Cram is with us, we will have the playing of the national anthem. Yeah.
due to technical difficulties, we don't have the national anthem, so we have to say farewell without.
Well, Robert could join me in singing it, but I won't put him under pressure.
So,
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. We say goodbye and thank you for joining us today.
Bye all.
All the best.
thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Robert.
Webster.
Again.